The church smelled faintly of lilies and old wood polish. Grace Porter, 28, stood beneath a spray of white roses, her thrift store veil trembling slightly as the organ began to play. She wasn't the kind of bride who belonged in a mansion or a glossy magazine cover. Her hands were calloused from grading papers, her shoes borrowed from her best friend, and her heart, so full it could burst, was the only thing truly expensive about her that day. Ethan Caldwell looked every inch the dream, tall, polished, his smile trained for success. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, she believed the vows as if they were oxygen. He whispered, "You'll never have to worry about anything again, Grace." And she, foolishly, took that to mean love. Flashbulbs popped. Guests clapped. Only his mother's eyes stayed cold. "She's not our kind," Mrs. Caldwell murmured to a friend, her lips stiff as porcelain. Pretty story, poor ending. Grace didn't hear. She was too busy promising herself that she'd prove everyone wrong, that love could cross any border, even class. After the reception, they drove away in a rented convertible, confetti trailing like tiny prayers behind them. Seattle's skyline shimmered in the dusk, and Grace rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. "You're sure about this?" she asked softly. "Leaving everything behind for me?" Ethan smiled, eyes on the road. "Of course, baby. You're my future." But that future was already being written in invisible ink. While Grace leaned against him, Ethan's phone buzzed with a hidden message. From Maya L. "Congratulations. Don't forget tomorrow's transfer. Same account." His thumb hovered, then pressed delete. Grace didn't see. She was staring at the horizon, whispering, "Thank you, God. I finally made it." Outside the car window, the city lights blurred like melting stars, and somewhere behind them, Mrs. Caldwell's voice echoed in her head. "A girl like her doesn't belong in our world." Grace smiled anyway, clutching Ethan's hand, completely unaware that the man beside her had already signed documents putting every asset and her future under his name. The wedding band on her finger gleamed in the dashboard light, a perfect golden circle that promised forever. But forever, for Grace Porter, would last exactly 9 months. The first morning after the wedding should have felt like a dream. But for Grace Porter, it felt like walking into someone else's life. The house Ethan brought her to wasn't a home, it was a glass museum. Every surface gleamed, every object whispered money. The walls smelled faintly of lemon polish and silence. She'd grown up in a small apartment that rattled whenever a bus passed by. Here, she couldn't even hear her own heartbeat. "Isn't it perfect?" Ethan asked, setting down her suitcase before disappearing into a phone call. Grace stood in the middle of the marble foyer, her reflection scattered across the cold floor. Perfect, she thought, and empty. Days turned into weeks. Ethan left early, returned late, his perfume replaced by the scent of corporate meetings. He gave her a platinum credit card, for whatever you need, and took away everything else that mattered, the bank accounts, the insurance, the car, all under his name. He said it was for convenience. Grace smiled, trusting him, too naive to know that love built on power eventually becomes a cage. She tried to fill her days with purpose. She applied to teach at a local school, but the headmistress frowned when she saw the Caldwell name. "Mr. Caldwell already called," she said carefully. "He prefers you focus on family matters." Grace's cheeks burned with humiliation. Ethan said it was just temporary, until things settle at work. Evenings were worse. The dinner table for 12 echoed with the sound of one fork hitting porcelain. Ethan scrolled through his phone while Grace talked about lesson plans she'd never get to teach. When she asked if they could start saving for their own place, he laughed. "Grace, this house is in my family's name. Why would we ever need something smaller?" One night, she wandered into his office, dusting the shelves just to feel useful. On his desk lay a stack of papers labeled Caldwell Holdings Insurance Division. The words meant nothing to her then. What she didn't know was that her entire life, her medical coverage, her security, was buried in those files, already under Ethan's control. Loneliness crept in quietly. She began writing letters to her old students, but never mailed them. She cooked elaborate dinners that went untouched. She even tried redecorating the guest room, only for Ethan to snap, "Don't change anything without asking." Then came the night she told him she was pregnant. She waited until he came home, tie loosened, whiskey glass in hand. "Ethan," she said softly, placing his palm on her belly, "we're having a baby." For a brief second she saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear? Calculation? It vanished behind a practiced smile. "That's great news," he said. "We'll take care of everything." But days later, Grace overheard a conversation outside his office door. Ethan's voice, low and sharp. "It complicates things. The board doesn't want distractions." Then another voice, a woman's. Maya Lang. "Don't worry," she purred. "You'll still have the promotion. She's just temporary." Grace froze. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. Temporary. That was what she was to them. A complication, not a wife. That night she lay awake, staring at the gold-framed wedding photo on the dresser. Two smiling faces, one real, one rehearsed. The room felt colder than ever. She whispered into the darkness, "Maybe love isn't supposed to feel like prison walls." But the walls were already closing in, and she hadn't even seen the lock yet. By the 5th month of her pregnancy, Grace Porter had memorized every sound in that enormous house. The distant hum of the refrigerator, the echo of her own footsteps, the soft thud of doors closing when Ethan thought she wasn't listening. The home that once symbolized safety now felt like a stage where she played the part of perfect wife, and the audience had long gone home. Ethan grew more distant with each passing week. His kisses became quick, his smile rehearsed. When Grace asked about baby names, he mumbled something about needing to focus on work. His phone was always face down on the counter, locked with a new password. The smell of his cologne changed too, from the woody scent she used to love to something expensive and unfamiliar, sharp as betrayal. One evening, Grace found a strand of blonde hair on his jacket. She wasn't blonde, she wasn't foolish either. "Who is she?" she asked quietly when he came home. Ethan didn't even flinch. "A colleague," he said, loosening his tie. "Don't start with the paranoia, Grace. You've been emotional lately." The way he said emotional felt like a slap. Grace turned away, holding her stomach as the baby kicked for the first time. The irony made her want to laugh and cry all at once, life growing inside her while her marriage quietly died. The next morning, she caught Ethan leaving early in a suit she'd never seen before. "Big presentation," he said. Hours later, scrolling through the local paper, she saw a photo from a company gala. Ethan Caldwell, laughing beside a striking blonde woman in a backless gown. The caption read, "Caldwell and Lang lead new initiative." Grace stared at it until the words blurred. Maya Lang. The same name she'd overheard weeks ago. That night, Ethan came home late smelling of champagne. "You saw the article," he guessed, pouring himself a drink. "It's just business, Grace. You're pregnant, hormonal. Don't make this about you." She wanted to scream, but her throat betrayed her. "Ethan, I left everything for you, my job, my life. I just need to know if we're still—" He cut her off sharply. "Don't guilt me. I give you everything." Everything. The word echoed through her skull like thunder. Everything except respect. Except love. Except the truth. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's absences stretched longer. He stopped answering her calls. Grace tried reaching out to his office, but the secretary told her he was out of town on business. Yet she saw the charges on their shared card. Dinners at luxury restaurants, hotel reservations in the city. Late one night, unable to sleep, Grace went downstairs for water. In the reflection of the kitchen window, she saw the flash of headlights, Ethan's car pulling into the driveway. Her heart lifted for a second. Maybe he'd come home to her. But then she saw it. A silhouette in the passenger seat. Blonde hair catching the moonlight. Maya. Grace froze behind the curtain, watching her husband lean across the seat and kiss the woman she had feared into existence. Her heart didn't shatter. It went silent. A still, terrible silence that meant something inside her had died. She backed away from the window, one hand on her belly. "You deserve better than this," she whispered to the tiny heartbeat inside her. "And so do I." Upstairs, Ethan's laughter drifted through the halls like a ghost, proof that the man she married no longer existed. The morning after that sleepless night, Grace Porter woke with swollen eyes and a decision. She couldn't live like a ghost in her own marriage. She cooked breakfast, her hands trembling as she set the table for two, rehearsing the words she'd finally say to Ethan. But the sound of his voice downstairs stopped her mid-step. He was already on the phone. "Yeah, the board approved it," he said, his tone brisk. "I'll transfer the remaining funds today." "No, she doesn't know." Then silence, followed by a low laugh. "She's too busy playing house." Grace's heart pounded. She stepped back, careful not to make a sound. Funds? What funds? The baby kicked, sharp and insistent, as if sensing her fear. When Ethan hung up, he turned toward the stairs and froze when he saw her. "How long have you been standing there?" he asked. "Long enough," she whispered. "What don't I know, Ethan?" He smiled faintly, that corporate smile she used at client dinners. "Grace, you're imagining things again. You need to rest." "I'm not crazy," she said, voice breaking. "I know about Maya. I saw you." For a moment, something dark flickered across his face. Then he laughed. "So? You want me to apologize? Grow up. You knew who I was when you married me." Grace's breath caught. "I thought you were a good man." He thought wrong. The conversation ended like a door slamming shut. For the next few weeks, Ethan treated her like a fragile inconvenience, someone to be tolerated, not loved. When she suggested counseling, he dismissed it. When she mentioned the baby's first ultrasound, he said he had meetings. One afternoon, Grace got a call from the school she used to teach at. Her old students had made a card for her baby shower. The teacher on the phone said, "We'd love for you to visit." Grace smiled through tears. "I'd love that." But when she told Ethan, he said coldly, "You're not going. It looks bad for my image." "My image," she repeated softly, realizing how small she'd become in his world. Soon after, she received a letter from the district office. Her contract had been terminated due to extended leave. Ethan had already filed the paperwork. She had no income, no savings, no access to their joint account. When she confronted him, he waved a glass of whiskey. "Grace, you don't need money. I provide everything you need." "But what happens if you stop?" he smirked. "Then you'll find out who really runs this marriage." That night, she tried to log in to their online banking. The password no longer worked. When she called the insurance company to confirm her prenatal coverage, the agent said politely, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell, but only the account holder can make inquiries." She wasn't the account holder. She wasn't anything but a name on a ring. Grace stared at her reflection in the dark window, seeing the outline of a woman she no longer recognized. A woman who once believed that love could erase poverty, that kindness could soften cruelty. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. She whispered, "You can take everything, Ethan, but not my child." Upstairs, his phone buzzed with a new message from Maya. "It's done. She's off the policy." The night the contractions began, the world outside was collapsing under a winter storm. Rain hammered the windows of the Caldwell mansion, and thunder rolled over Seattle like the sound of judgment. Grace Porter stood in the kitchen, clutching her stomach, her breath short and uneven. It was 3 weeks before her due date, but the pain came in sharp, steady waves. She called Ethan first. No answer. She tried again. Straight to voicemail. On the third attempt, his voice message echoed cruelly through the phone. "Leave a message. I'll get back to you." Grace sank against the counter, her knuckles white. Her water broke. Panic clawed up her chest. "Please," she whispered, dialing again. Still nothing. She grabbed her coat, keys, and the small hospital bag she'd packed weeks ago, back when she still believed Ethan would be there to hold her hand. Outside, the driveway was slick with rain. The storm blurred everything. The streetlights smeared into halos of white. Her phone buzzed at last. Relief surged, until she saw the message. "Busy. Don't make a scene. You'll be fine." Busy. Tears blurred her vision. She called a cab. The operator hesitated when she mentioned the address. It was miles from downtown, roads flooding fast. "We'll try to send someone, ma'am," the dispatcher said. "But it might take a while." By the time headlights finally cut through the rain, Grace was doubled over, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the doorway. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, helped her into the back seat. "Hang in there, miss. We'll get you there." The hospital was 20 minutes away. Each minute felt like a lifetime. Grace tried to breathe like she'd been taught in prenatal class, but fear strangled every breath. She thought of Ethan, of the house that was never hers, of the baby that might not survive this storm. "First baby?" the driver asked gently. Grace nodded, tears streaking her face. "Yes, my husband. He's not answering." The man frowned but said nothing more. When they reached the hospital, he jumped out to help her. "You'll be okay," he said. "God doesn't forget mothers." Inside, the bright lights and antiseptic smell hit her like ice. A nurse rushed over, but when Grace handed over her insurance card, the woman hesitated. She typed something into the computer, frowned, then tried again. "I'm sorry," the nurse said quietly. This policy was canceled this morning. Do you have another form of payment? Grace blinked. That can't be right. My husband… I'm afraid we can't admit you without active coverage or a deposit, the nurse interrupted softly, her eyes darting with pity. The emergency ward is full tonight. I wish I could. The words blurred into static. Grace's knees buckled. Please, she gasped. The baby's coming. But the nurse just whispered, I'm so sorry. Security guards looked away as Grace fell to the cold tile floor, clutching her stomach. Around her, people moved past, their shoes clicking against the marble, their faces a blur. She screamed once, twice, and then everything tilted. The lights, the sound, her heartbeat. Her last thought before the darkness took her was of Ethan's text. Busy. And somewhere far above the storm, lightning split the sky, illuminating the moment her world went completely dark. Rainwater trailed from Grace Porter's shoes across the sterile hospital floor. The sound of it, soft, uneven, was the only proof she was still alive. Every contraction felt like her body was being ripped in two. Her dress clung to her skin, soaked and cold. She pressed one hand against the counter, the other over her belly, her voice trembling. Please, my baby, I need help. The nurse behind the glass looked nervous. She typed again, shaking her head. Mrs. Caldwell, your policy was terminated this morning. I'm truly sorry, but without coverage or a deposit… Grace's vision blurred. You don't understand. I don't have time. I wish I could do more, the nurse whispered, her voice cracking. If you can reach your husband… Grace laughed, a sound halfway between a sob and a scream. He's not coming. Another contraction hit, sharp and merciless. Her knees buckled. The nurse called for a wheelchair, but an administrator stopped her. No insurance, no admission without authorization, he said flatly. We could lose our license. Then take mine, Grace gasped. Take my name, take my life, just save my baby. People stared but didn't move. Phones recorded. Someone murmured, Isn't that Caldwell's wife? As though she were an exhibit, not a woman bleeding on their floor. Grace tried to stand, but her body gave up. She slid down the cold wall, her breath ragged. Blood pooled beneath her knees. Please, she whispered again, please. The world tilted. Her heart hammered like it was trying to keep time with the storm outside. Through the haze, a child's cry echoed from somewhere down the hall, a sound both haunting and hopeful. Grace clung to it like a rope in the dark. Hold on, baby, she murmured. Just hold on. The nurse's voice trembled. Sir, please, we can't leave her here. The administrator's reply was ice. If she can't pay, she has to sign discharge papers. We have rules. Rules. Always rules. Grace tried to speak, but only a strangled sound escaped. She pressed her forehead to the tile, praying for the pain to stop. And then, footsteps, heavy, purposeful, the kind that made people look up. A man's voice, deep and calm. What's going on here? The nurse turned, relief washing over her face. Mr. Pierce, she's in labor. She has no insurance on record. Logan Pierce stepped into the fluorescent light, rain dripping from his coat. His sharp gray eyes landed on Grace, and for a split second, the world seemed to still. Grace Porter, he said, disbelief flickering in his voice. She blinked, barely conscious. Do I know you? He crouched beside her, his voice breaking with memory. 2 years ago, outside Edgewood Elementary. My son had an asthma attack. You didn't wait for an ambulance. You saved him. Grace stared at him, dazed. Your son? Yes, he said, removing his coat and wrapping it around her trembling body, and I'm not about to let the woman who saved him die on this floor. He turned to the stunned staff, his tone like steel. Get her to delivery, now. Everything, equipment, staff, medicine, goes on my account. Logan Pierce. The administrator hesitated. Sir, we can't. Then call your board, Logan snapped. Tell them the hospital just denied care to a woman in active labor. See how that headline plays out tomorrow. Silence. Then chaos. Nurses rushed forward. A gurney appeared. Grace was lifted, her body limp but her hand still clutched around Logan's sleeve. As they wheeled her toward the operating room, he leaned close and whispered, You're safe now, I promise. For the first time in months, Grace believed someone meant those words. The world around Grace blurred into white noise. The hiss of oxygen, the squeak of wheels, the sharp scent of antiseptic. She drifted in and out of consciousness as nurses hurried beside her, their voices blurring into fragments. BP dropping, fetal heart rate unstable, move, move. Through the fog, one voice cut through everything, calm, commanding, familiar. Keep her steady, Page Dr. Lambert from trauma, and someone call anesthesia, now. Logan Pierce walked beside the gurney, coat gone, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked out of place amid the chaos. Expensive suit damp with rain, hair dripping, jaw tight with controlled fury. But in his eyes burned the kind of focus that made people move faster. Grace tried to speak, but her throat betrayed her. "Please, my baby." He leaned closer, his hand resting gently on her wrist. "You'll both be fine," he said, voice steady, even though his pulse thundered in his neck. "Just keep breathing. I've got you." The words echoed somewhere deep in her fading mind. "I've got you." Nobody had said that to her in a long, long time. They burst through double doors into the delivery room. Doctors shouted orders. The monitor screamed with each slowing beat of the baby's heart. Logan hovered near the door, refusing to leave, even as a nurse urged him to wait outside. "She's going into distress," the doctor said. "We need to operate, now." Grace caught fragments of conversation, each one slicing her open deeper than the pain. Placental rupture, too late for natural delivery, risk to both. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Don't let me die," she whispered. Logan stepped forward, ignoring the doctor's protest. He took her hand, his voice fierce but soft. "You saved my boy when everyone else hesitated. You didn't ask if we could pay, didn't check paperwork, you just acted. Now it's my turn." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I didn't even know your name." "Logan," he said. "Logan Pierce. And you're going to remember it when you wake up." The doctor nodded. "We're losing time. Prep for emergency C-section." They wheeled her under the blinding lights. Grace felt herself slipping into darkness, the edges of the world folding in. Somewhere above, she heard the flatline beep begin to stretch, long and unbroken. Panic rippled through the room. "Stay with me, Grace," Logan said, gripping her hand tighter. "Breathe." For a moment there was nothing, just a still, suffocating silence. Then, faint and fragile, a cry filled the room. One sharp, defiant sound that cut through the noise. "It's a boy," someone said. Grace's lips curved into a weak smile. "My baby." Her body relaxed, tears mingling with sweat. She wanted to hold him, but exhaustion dragged her under. The last thing she saw was Logan standing over her, face pale but eyes bright with relief, holding the smallest bundle she'd ever seen. Outside the room, thunder rolled again. Rain lashed against the hospital windows. Logan handed the baby to a nurse, his voice low and steady. "Take care of him. He's her reason to fight." When the doctor stepped out, he said quietly, "She's stable, for now. But she lost a lot of blood. It's going to be a long night." Logan nodded, staring through the glass at Grace lying unconscious, her pale hands still clutching the corner of his coat. And in that moment he made a silent vow. If she survived, he would make sure she never had to beg for help again. The clock on the operating room wall glowed 3:47 a.m., but time had stopped meaning anything. The storm outside rattled the windows like a warning from God. Inside, the room was a cold constellation of metal instruments and white light. Grace lay still beneath a thin blanket, her skin pale as marble. Her pulse flickered weakly on the monitor, a trembling green line that seemed to fight for every beat. Logan Pierce stood behind the glass, still soaked from the rain. His jaw was clenched, his hand pressed flat against the window, as if sheer willpower could keep her alive. Nurses moved like ghosts around her, their voices clipped and urgent. "BP 40/20, she's crashing. Get 2 units of O negative, now." The doctor's words cut through the static. "If we don't get that baby breathing in the next 30 seconds, we'll lose them both." Logan's chest tightened. He'd seen people die before, business partners, strangers in car crashes, but never like this. Never someone who looked so fragile and undeserving of such cruelty. He remembered her kneeling on a rainy sidewalk 2 years ago, cradling his son as he turned blue from an asthma attack. Grace hadn't waited for an ambulance. She'd given the boy CPR with her bare hands. "He's breathing," she'd said back then, her voice trembling with relief. Now Logan found himself whispering the same words like a prayer. "She's breathing. She's breathing." But the monitor screamed flatline. A long, piercing tone filled the room. "Clear," the doctor shouted. A defibrillator sparked. Grace's body jolted once, twice, then nothing. Logan's stomach dropped. He wanted to break the glass, to tear through the walls, to demand the universe give her back. Again, another jolt, a pause, then, miraculously, a blip. One small, stubborn heartbeat. "Pulse returning," the nurse said. "We've got her back." Logan's eyes stung. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But the fight wasn't over. On the table beside her, the newborn lay silent, motionless. The doctor's voice lowered to a whisper. "Come on, little one. Breathe for her." A nurse rubbed the tiny chest with a towel, tapping, coaxing. The seconds dragged, endless and cruel. Then suddenly, a weak cry broke through. Thin, wobbly, but alive. Everyone froze for a heartbeat. Then relief swept the room like air after drowning. "It's a boy," the nurse said softly, tears streaking her mask. "He's breathing." Grace, drifting in the gray space between sleep and death, heard it. That cry sliced through the darkness, pulling her back. Her lips moved soundlessly. "My baby." The doctor looked up. "She's stable, but we need to keep her under observation. Massive blood loss." Outside, Logan sagged against the wall, his body trembling. For the first time in years, the billionaire who thought he could control everything realized there were still things he couldn't buy, like the heartbeat of a good woman. Hours later, dawn broke over Seattle, pale light spilling through the hospital windows. Grace lay in recovery, her breathing shallow but steady. The baby, tiny, wrapped in blue, slept in a crib beside her. Logan stood near the window, phone buzzing with unanswered calls from board members and reporters. He ignored them all. His eyes stayed on the fragile mother and child, the two souls he'd saved and somehow owed more to than anyone in his empire. He whispered to himself, "She saved my son. Tonight, I saved her." Maybe that's how fate balances the books. But fate wasn't finished yet. Because while Grace fought for life, Ethan Caldwell had just learned she was still alive, and his reaction was nothing like relief. The rain had stopped by morning, but inside the Caldwell penthouse, the air still smelled of last night's whiskey and betrayal. Ethan Caldwell sat at the edge of his glass desk, phone buzzing nonstop. He wasn't worried. He was annoyed. He had a meeting at 9, an investor lunch at noon, and a mistress expecting roses before sunset. When his assistant finally called, his tone was clipped. "What is it, Daniel? Make it quick." "Sir, it's your wife. The hospital called last night. She went into labor." Ethan's pen stilled mid-signature. "And they said she almost died. A man covered her medical bills, a Mr. Logan Pierce, the billionaire." Ethan leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Pierce?" "Yes, sir. The story's spreading fast. Someone from the ER leaked a photo. It's trending. Billionaire saves abandoned wife." The pen snapped in his hand, ink splattered across a stack of financial documents. "Who authorized that call?" "Public relations says." "I didn't ask what PR says," he barked, slamming the phone down. His reflection stared back from the glossy black surface, sharp, controlled, dangerous. He dialed another number. Maya answered on the second ring, her voice sleepy but sharp. "You sound tense." "Get dressed," Ethan ordered. "We have a problem." Within the hour, they met in his downtown office. Maya Lang looked immaculate as always, silk blouse, perfect makeup, not a shred of conscience in sight. She dropped a newspaper on the desk. The headline screamed across the page, "Grace Caldwell's life saved by tech billionaire." Maya smirked. "She looks better on the front page than you do." Ethan glared. "This isn't funny. I told you to cancel that policy quietly." "I did, but the system logs everything. Maybe someone noticed." He paced like a caged animal. Pierce, of all people. Why the hell would he get involved? "He runs that charity fund for uninsured mothers," Maya said, crossing her legs. "You picked the wrong day to play God, Ethan." He turned sharply. "You listen to me. Nobody finds out I authorized that cancellation. Nobody. If this story spreads, the board will crucify me." Maya tilted her head, her smile thin. "Then maybe don't leave your fingerprints all over it." He grabbed her wrist, squeezing until she winced. "You were supposed to delete the record." "I tried," she snapped, yanking free. "But your wife's name triggered an audit flag. You can't erase her, Ethan. Not anymore." His phone buzzed again. "Unknown number," he answered. "Mr. Caldwell?" A male voice said. "This is Channel 7 News. We'd like a statement regarding your wife's hospitalization. Sources say you terminated her insurance hours before she went into labor. Care to comment?" Ethan froze. The reporter's words landed like bullets. He hung up without replying, his pulse hammering in his ears. Maya exhaled, pale. "It's out, isn't it?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the window, city lights reflecting in his eyes. For the first time, Ethan Caldwell looked like a man realizing he might lose everything. His career, his reputation, his freedom. Finally, he muttered, "If she thinks she can humiliate me, she's mistaken. I made her, and I can destroy her." Maya's voice wavered. Ethan, she almost died. He turned slowly, his expression chillingly calm. Then maybe she should have stayed dead. Across the city, Logan Pierce stood in the hospital nursery, watching the infant sleep. He didn't know yet that those words had already left Ethan's mouth, or how far the man would go to protect his lies. But the storm was far from over. For Ethan Caldwell, love wasn't the only thing dying. It was his empire. By the time Grace Porter opened her eyes again, the storm had passed. Morning light filtered through the blinds, warm and golden. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The steady beeping of machines, the faint cry of newborns, the antiseptic air, it felt like waking up in another world. Then it hit her. The baby. Her hands flew to her stomach. Panic rose like a wave. A nurse appeared instantly, smiling. "You're safe, sweetheart. Your little boy's just fine." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Can I see him?" "Of course." The nurse wheeled in a small bassinet. The baby's chest rose and fell, tiny fists curled near his face. Grace reached out, touching his cheek with trembling fingers. "Hey, my little fighter," she whispered. "We made it." But beneath the warmth of that moment, a cold question lingered. How? Who had saved her when Ethan hadn't? The answer arrived moments later. A knock on the door. A tall man entered, his presence filling the small room. Logan Pierce, the stranger from the storm, stood beside her bed with quiet authority. "I hope you don't mind me checking in," he said softly. "You've had quite a night." Grace blinked, disoriented. You were there? "You saved my son once," he replied, smiling faintly. "It was my turn." Gratitude choked her. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His tone was firm. No woman should die because her husband canceled a policy. Grace froze. "You know about that?" He hesitated, then nodded. "The hospital staff told me. They were afraid to admit you without coverage, so I paid, and I made sure your story won't be buried." Her heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "Reporters picked it up overnight," Logan said. "Your name's in the headlines. The world knows what he did." Grace stared at him, horrified. "No, I didn't want that." "Grace," Logan said gently, "he left you to die." Tears burned her eyes. "He'll destroy me for this." "Then let him try," Logan said, voice like steel. "He can't touch you now." But across town, Ethan Caldwell was already plotting. At his office, he met with Maya Lang in the shadow of drawn blinds. "We're gonna fix this," he said. His tone was calm, but the vein pulsing at his temple told another story. "I want every trace of her name off the system. Delete her medical files, the policy cancellation logs, the payment trail, everything." Maya hesitated. "That's illegal, Ethan." He leaned closer, eyes cold. "You think I care? This scandal will ruin me. You helped cancel the policy. You'll go down with me if it surfaces." She swallowed hard. "What about the Pierce Foundation?" "They're involved now." "Then we bury them too," Ethan hissed. "I know people who can scrub entire databases, and if Grace tries to talk, we'll make her look unstable, postpartum, delusional." Maya's stomach turned. "She almost died, Ethan. Maybe it's time to let it go." He slammed his hand on the table. "You let it go, you lose everything. Do you understand me?" Maya flinched. "Yes." When she left the office, tears streaked her makeup. She looked at her reflection in the elevator mirror and whispered, "He's going to destroy her and himself." Back at the hospital, Grace sat up, exhaustion etched into her features. Logan watched her gently stroke her baby's hair. "He's beautiful," he said quietly. She nodded, whispering, "His name is Noah." Logan smiled. "A good name. Strong, like his mother." But outside the hospital walls, Ethan Caldwell's machine had already begun turning. Emails deleted, records wiped, lies spreading like smoke. And by the time Grace took her first peaceful breath as a mother, her husband had already decided to erase her from existence. For 2 days, Grace Porter floated between relief and exhaustion. She could barely believe she was alive, that her baby was breathing, that the sun could still rise after a night like that. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and murmuring admiration for the miracle mother. Logan Pierce stopped by every morning, polite but distant, always leaving before reporters could swarm. But peace never lasts long in stories like hers. On the 3rd day, a young nurse slipped quietly into the room while Grace was feeding Noah. The girl's eyes darted toward the hallway before she spoke. "Mrs. Porter, someone asked me to give you this." She pressed a small flash drive into Grace's palm and whispered, "Don't tell anyone where you got it." Then she was gone. Grace frowned, staring at the object as if it might burn her fingers. The label read only one word: policy. Her pulse quickened. She waited until Noah fell asleep, then slid the drive into Logan's tablet on the nightstand. Files appeared instantly: insurance records, payment logs, system entries. Her name flashed on screen again and again. But one line made her blood run cold. Cancellation authorized by Ethan Caldwell. Date time 10:04 a.m., same day as labor admission. Her breath caught. He hadn't forgotten her insurance. He destroyed it deliberately. Logan entered the room moments later with coffee. "You're supposed to be resting," he said, half smiling, until he saw her face. "Grace? What is it?" She turned the screen toward him. "This. He did this." He read the file, jaw tightening. "Where did you get this?" "A nurse," she whispered, "said someone wanted me to see it." Logan's eyes darkened. "This isn't just malpractice. It's fraud. If this leaks, Ethan loses everything." Grace shook her head. "I don't want revenge. I just want my life back." "You deserve justice," he said firmly. "No," she said softly, "I deserve peace." But neither of them would get it. Not yet. Across the city, Ethan Caldwell stared at his phone, reading an email from hospital administration. "Unauthorized access detected. Patient file Grace Porter." His pulse spiked. Someone had retrieved the deleted records. He slammed his fist on the desk. "Maya!" She entered cautiously. "I told you it can't all be erased. Their IT flagged it." "Then shut it down," he snapped. "I want that hospital quiet. I want her file gone. Pierce is meddling. Find out how deep he's in." Maya's voice trembled. "Ethan, maybe this is over. The woman nearly died." He turned sharply, his hand slamming the wall beside her head. "It's over when I say it is." Back in her hospital room, Grace stared at the newborn sleeping beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling. Her heart felt both full and broken. She whispered, "You'll never have to beg for love, not like I did." Logan watched her from the doorway. "You know," he said quietly, "most people wouldn't have survived what you did. That takes strength." She met his gaze. "Strength or stubbornness? Sometimes they're the same thing," he said, smiling faintly. Grace turned back to the tablet, tracing Ethan's name on the screen. "I married a man who made me believe I was safe. I didn't realize I'd signed my own prison sentence." Outside, the rain began again, soft at first, then harder, as if the world itself couldn't decide whether to cry or cleanse. And somewhere deep inside Grace, the first seed of something dangerous began to grow. Not vengeance, but truth. And truth, once planted, never dies quietly. The hospital corridors seemed quieter the next morning, too quiet, as if the building itself knew something dangerous was about to surface. Grace Porter sat upright in bed, one hand gently rocking Noah's bassinet, the other clutching the flash drive like it contained her entire life. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, Ethan's voice replayed in her head. "You'll be fine. Don't make a scene." Logan Pierce arrived just after dawn, carrying 2 coffees. "You look like you've been up all night," he said, trying to sound light, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "I have," she murmured. "I read every file." He set the cups down and leaned beside her. "And?" Her voice broke. "He canceled it, on purpose. The same morning I went into labor. There's a timestamp, a signature. He didn't even hesitate." Logan's eyes hardened. "Then we'll make sure the world sees it." Grace hesitated. "I'm scared. He's powerful, Logan. He'll twist everything. He'll say I'm unstable, that I'm lying for sympathy." Logan reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "You won't face him alone. I've already contacted a lawyer, someone I trust. But before we go public, we need proof that can't be erased." Grace frowned. "You think he'll delete this?" "He already tried," Logan said grimly. "The hospital's IT logs show 2 unauthorized deletion attempts last night from an encrypted corporate network." Her stomach turned. "Ethan?" Logan nodded. "And he's not working alone." Across town, in the Caldwell Insurance Tower, Ethan stormed into his office. "Did you do it?" he barked at Maya Lang, who sat nervously at her computer. "I wiped the external drives, but there's a backup on the hospital's secure server," she said. "It's mirrored to a federal audit database. If Pierce got his hands on it, it's too late." Ethan slammed his fist on the desk. "Then I'll make sure Pierce goes down with me." "Ethan, listen," Maya pleaded. "He's not your enemy. You are. You did this." He stared at her like she was a stranger. "You think I built this empire by being soft? You think anyone remembers kindness in this world?" "No," she whispered, "but they remember monsters." Back at the hospital, Grace was signing discharge papers when a nurse approached, whispering, "Someone from your husband's company called earlier. They wanted your room number." Grace froze. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," the nurse said quickly. "But you should be careful. Hospitals aren't safe when people have money to hide things." As Grace left the room, a chill crept down her spine. She looked at Logan. "He knows I have the files." He nodded. "Then we move fast. My legal team will copy everything to secure storage. Once it's there, no one can erase the truth." Grace tightened her coat around Noah, her eyes fierce now. "He erased my name from his life. Let's see how he likes it when his name becomes poison." Hours later, in a darkened office across town, Ethan watched as one of his hackers worked feverishly. "Wipe the hospital archive. I don't care how." The hacker looked up nervously. "Sir, that's federal property. If they catch—" "Do it," Ethan snapped. But in his panic, he didn't notice the blinking red light on the server console, a silent indicator that every keystroke was being recorded. The attempt to destroy the truth had become evidence of guilt. Back at the Pierce Foundation headquarters, Logan's assistant entered the room. "We've got it," she said, holding a drive identical to Grace's. "Every log, every deleted file, every timestamp." Grace exhaled shakily, holding Noah close. "Then he can't hide anymore." Logan met her eyes. "No, but he's going to try, and that's when he'll make his biggest mistake." Outside, thunder rolled again, as if the sky itself were warning Ethan Caldwell that his empire was already cracking, and Grace Porter was the fault line. 3 days after leaving the hospital, Grace Porter sat in a quiet corner of the Pierce Foundation offices, staring at the city skyline that once symbolized everything she thought she wanted: success, security, belonging. Now, it just looked like glass and lies. Logan Pierce stood behind her, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but determined. "Yes, have everything ready by noon," he said. "No leaks, no press until I give the word." He hung up, then turned to Grace. "It's time." Grace's fingers tightened around the cup of tea she hadn't touched. "Time for what?" "For him to reveal who he really is." Logan slid a file across the table, emails, transaction receipts, signed approvals. "We've traced his deletion attempts. He used his company server, which means he violated corporate law, but we need him to confirm it, on record." Grace frowned. "You mean trick him?" Logan's eyes were cold, unblinking. "I mean expose him." Across town, Ethan Caldwell sat in his office, staring at his reflection in the window. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it until he saw the message. "Meeting request. Contract dispute regarding policy termination. Urgent." It was signed by Pierce Foundation Legal. He cursed under his breath but couldn't resist. If he didn't attend, it would look like guilt. If he did, maybe he could control the narrative. He texted Maya, "Get to the hospital boardroom in an hour. Don't ask questions." At noon sharp, Ethan entered the sleek glass conference room. Grace was already there, sitting straight-backed in a pale blue blouse. Logan stood beside her, arms crossed. Ethan froze, his mask of charm flickering for the first time. "Grace," he said slowly, "you look—" "Well." She didn't smile. "You look exactly the same." "Let's not be dramatic," he said, slipping into the seat across from her. "This whole thing is a misunderstanding. I've spoken to the company's lawyers." Logan interrupted. "Spare us the performance. You canceled your wife's insurance. We have the logs." Ethan laughed, forced and brittle. "Do you know how many people have access to that system? Someone forged my credentials." "Then this should clear everything up," Logan said smoothly, pressing a button on the remote. A hidden camera clicked on. Ethan's eyes darted to it, but it was too late. A screen behind him flickered to life, displaying lines of data, timestamps, and finally a video feed. From the night of the deletion attempt, Ethan's office appeared on screen. He was pacing, shouting, "I said delete it. I don't care what it takes. Wipe her record." His own voice echoed through the room like a ghost he couldn't silence. Maya Lang appeared in the video, pleading, "Ethan, this is fraud." He turned on her, face twisted with rage. "Then let it be fraud. I won't let that woman ruin me." The real Ethan jumped to his feet, face pale. "This is edited. You can't—" Grace's voice cut him off, calm but lethal. "I never wanted to ruin you. You did that yourself." Ethan looked at Logan. "You think this makes you a hero? You're destroying my life." Logan stepped closer. "You did that the day you left her bleeding on a hospital floor." Security guards appeared in the doorway, quiet, professional, waiting. Ethan's arrogance crumbled. "You can't do this. I built this company. You'll regret it." Grace rose from her chair, her voice steady. "No, Ethan. I regret ever believing you could love anything other than power." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Logan gave a small nod. "It's over." As security escorted Ethan out, he turned one last time, his voice trembling with fury. "You think you've won? You don't know what I'm capable of." Grace held his gaze, eyes cold and clear. "Yes, I do. And now, so does everyone else." Outside, flashbulbs erupted as news crews waited, because the meeting that was meant to save Ethan Caldwell had just become his public execution. By morning, the video had gone viral. Headlines screamed across every major network. Ethan Caldwell exposed an insurance fraud scandal. Clips from the meeting replayed on every channel, his voice shouting, "Then let it be fraud," looped endlessly beside photos of Grace Porter holding her newborn son. Grace didn't watch the news. She sat in her small apartment downtown, rocking Noah while rain tapped softly on the window. The world was finally seeing the man she had lived with for years. The mask stripped away, the lies laid bare. But instead of satisfaction, all she felt was a hollow ache. "You're safe now," she whispered to her baby. "That's all that matters." Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Caldwell's empire burned. His phone exploded with calls he couldn't answer. The company's board convened an emergency session. Investors demanded explanations. Outside the glass tower of Caldwell Holdings, protesters and cameras swarmed. Inside, Maya Lang stood by the window, pale and shaking. Ethan stormed in, tie loosened, face red with fury. "They're suspending me," he shouted, "after everything I've done for this company." "You mean after everything you've stolen?" Maya muttered, but too quietly for him to hear. He threw a folder onto the desk. "They want access to all my personal files, bank accounts, emails, everything. They're trying to make me a scapegoat." Maya crossed her arms. "Ethan, you are the scapegoat. You did this." His eyes darkened. "Don't start preaching now, Maya. You were part of it." Her voice trembled. "I followed your orders because I was terrified, but you crossed a line I can't defend anymore." He stepped closer, menace radiating from him. "You think you can just walk away from me?" "Yes," she said quietly, "and you can't stop me this time." She handed him an envelope. "Subpoena. They called me to testify." He snatched it, face twisting. "You wouldn't dare." "I already have." Ethan's hands clenched around the paper. "Then you're finished too. When I go down, I'm taking everyone with me." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "You already took everything. My job, my conscience, my peace. What else is left for you to destroy?" Back at the Pierce Foundation, Logan watched the scandal unfold from his office. The stock market ticker showed Caldwell Holdings plummeting 47% in a single day. His assistant entered. "The board removed him this morning. He's out, and the SEC is investigating." Logan exhaled, relief mixed with grim satisfaction. "Good, but keep protection on Grace and the baby. He's desperate. Desperate men do stupid things." Grace was still recovering when the knock came that afternoon. A courier delivered a letter with the Caldwell Holdings logo. Inside, a single page read, "You may have ruined my career, but you'll never ruin me. Watch your back." Her hands shook. Logan found her minutes later, sitting frozen on the couch, letter in her lap. "He's threatening you again, isn't he?" She nodded weakly. "I thought it was over." "It will be," Logan said firmly. "I promise you that." Across town, Ethan poured another drink, the city lights reflecting off the glass. His office was stripped bare, his nameplate removed, his future shrinking with every sip. The news anchor's voice played faintly from the television. "Former executive Ethan Caldwell under federal investigation for fraud and reckless endangerment. Bail hearing set for next week." He laughed bitterly. "They think they can cage me." He turned off the TV and whispered to himself, "They don't know me at all." Meanwhile, Maya stood outside the courthouse, reporters swarming her. One shouted, "Miss Lang, do you regret working for him?" Her answer was soft, almost lost beneath the noise. "Every single day." As evening fell, Grace looked out her window, holding Noah close, while city sirens wailed in the distance. The world was finally learning the truth, but truth, she realized, didn't erase scars. And somewhere in the darkness, Ethan Caldwell was already planning the one move that could destroy everything she had left. The courthouse was gray and cold that morning, its stone walls slick with rain. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, shouting questions as Maya Lang climbed the steps. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward her face. Did you help Ethan Caldwell cancel his wife's insurance? Were you his accomplice or his victim? She didn't answer. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement, each step heavier than the last. For months she'd lived in Ethan's shadow, his lover, his enabler, his shield. But today, she was done being silent. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Grace Porter sat quietly near the front, holding Logan's hand, her body tense but her face calm. It was the first time she'd seen Maya since the hospital, the woman who had pressed delete on her life. Grace had expected to feel rage, but what she felt instead was something closer to pity. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Ethan sat at the defense table, looking smaller than Grace remembered. His tailored suit couldn't hide the sleepless nights etched into his face. But when he saw her, his smirk returned. He mouthed, "You shouldn't have come." Maya was sworn in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I worked for Ethan Caldwell for 5 years as his executive assistant." The prosecutor stepped forward. "Miss Lang, can you explain your role in the insurance cancellation involving Mrs. Porter?" Maya hesitated, eyes flicking toward Ethan. His glare was a silent warning. She took a shaky breath. "Ethan instructed me to terminate the policy. He said his wife was a liability." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "Liar!" The judge banged her gavel. "Mr. Caldwell, you'll remain silent." Maya's voice trembled, but she kept going. "I didn't want to do it. I knew it was wrong. But he said if I didn't, he'd destroy my career." Tears welled in her eyes. "He told me she was hysterical, that the baby wasn't even his. I believed him. I was stupid." Grace's breath caught. Her baby? Not his? The lie twisted her stomach, but she forced herself to stay still. The prosecutor handed Maya a document. "Is this the original email he sent?" Maya nodded. "Yes, it authorizes me to cancel the policy under his direct order." The courtroom erupted. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, whispers filled the air. Ethan's face turned red. "You think they'll believe a woman who slept her way into my office?" He sneered. Maya lifted her chin. "Maybe not, but they'll believe the server logs. They'll believe the audit trail. You can't erase everything, Ethan." For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. The prosecutor smiled faintly. No further questions. As Maya stepped down, she glanced at Grace. Their eyes met, one filled with guilt, the other with weary forgiveness. Grace nodded once, a silent truce. When court adjourned, reporters swarmed again, shouting, "Miss Lang, do you regret your choices?" Maya paused at the top of the courthouse steps, rain soaking her hair. "Regret doesn't fix anything," she said softly, "but truth does." She walked away without looking back. Inside the courtroom, Ethan sat motionless, surrounded by flashing cameras and furious lawyers. Logan leaned toward Grace. "This will finish him." Grace watched as her ex-husband's empire crumbled, not with explosions or screams, but with signatures, testimonies, and truth. "No," she said quietly, "this just shows who he's always been." Later that night, Maya returned to her apartment, empty, stripped of luxury, but peaceful for the first time. On her kitchen counter sat a note she'd written before testifying. "Tell the truth, even if it costs everything." She smiled faintly, tears blurring the ink. And somewhere across the city, Ethan Caldwell realized that the women he once controlled were now the ones who would decide his fate. The morning of the trial, the courthouse stood like a fortress against the gray Seattle sky. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras trained on the doors where the once powerful Ethan Caldwell would face judgment. The headlines were merciless. Fallen executive faces fraud charges in wife's insurance scandal. Inside, Grace Porter sat quietly beside her lawyer. Her palms were damp, heart pounding. This wasn't revenge, it was survival. Logan Pierce sat a few rows back, there not as a billionaire, but as the man who had promised she'd never fight alone. When Ethan entered, the room fell silent. Gone was the confident CEO. His tailored suit hung loose, his eyes hollow. But the smirk remained, a thin, defiant curve of arrogance. He glanced at Grace, whispering, "Enjoy the show, sweetheart." The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the court to order. "Mr. Caldwell, you stand charged with insurance fraud, falsification of records, and reckless endangerment. How do you plead?" Ethan rose slowly. "Not guilty." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Grace looked down, clutching the small pendant around her neck, a gift from Logan engraved with the word courage. The prosecution began, laying out every piece of evidence: the video recording from the meeting, the emails, the timestamps, the testimony from Maya Lang, whose trembling words had already captivated the nation. Each exhibit was a brick in the wall closing around him. When it was Grace's turn to testify, she stood, her knees shaking, but her voice steady. "I trusted him," she said softly. "I gave up everything because I believed in love. But love shouldn't come with conditions. He didn't just betray me. He nearly killed our son." Ethan's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. "Continue, Mrs. Porter." Grace looked at Ethan, her eyes calm and sad. "He canceled my insurance while I was in labor. I almost died in that hospital lobby. If it weren't for Mr. Pierce, my baby and I wouldn't be here." Ethan scoffed. "Oh, please. You think anyone believes you didn't plan this? The perfect sob story. Poor little teacher married the rich man, then cried victim when it fell apart." Gasps filled the courtroom. The prosecutor turned sharply. "Mr. Caldwell, you will remain silent." But Ethan couldn't stop. "She wanted my money." Everything she did, every tear, was an act. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Enough! One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt." Grace didn't flinch. She looked directly at him, her voice breaking but firm. "If I wanted your money, Ethan, I would have stayed, but I walked away with nothing except our son and my name." The courtroom fell utterly silent. When she stepped down, Logan's gaze met hers, pride shining in his eyes. For the first time in months, Grace felt free. After 2 days of testimony, the jury returned. The foreman stood, unfolding the verdict form. On all counts, guilty. Ethan's jaw dropped. "You can't. I built that company. Mr. Caldwell," the judge interrupted sharply. "You built it on deceit. You will serve 12 years in federal prison." Grace closed her eyes as the sound of cameras filled the room. Ethan struggled as officers led him away, shouting, "You'll regret this, Grace, all of you." She opened her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Ethan, the only one who will regret anything is you." As the doors closed behind him, the judge's final words echoed, "Let this serve as a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, is above accountability." Outside, the gray sky finally broke, sunlight spilling through the clouds. Logan placed his hand gently over Grace's. "It's over," he said. She looked toward the horizon, her son's future clear in her mind. "No," she replied softly, "it's just beginning." And for the first time in years, Grace Porter walked out of the courthouse, not as someone's wife, but as her own miracle. The clang of steel doors echoed through the prison hallway as Ethan Caldwell was led inside, his wrists bound in cold cuffs. The man who once commanded boardrooms and billion-dollar deals now shuffled in gray prison clothes, stripped of everything but his arrogance. Cameras caught the moment, and by nightfall, every network aired it. Ethan Caldwell begins 12-year sentence for fraud and endangerment. Grace Porter watched the coverage from her apartment, Noah asleep in her arms. She should have felt victorious, but instead, there was a quiet sadness, a grief for the years lost, the love she once believed in. Logan Pierce sat beside her, silent, letting the news play out. When the reporter mentioned Ethan's breakdown during sentencing, Grace whispered, "He'll never change, will he?" Logan shook his head. "People like him don't learn. They only lose." In his cell, Ethan paced like a caged animal. His father's letter had arrived that morning. A single line scrawled in trembling ink, "Your actions have destroyed everything this family built." The Caldwell name, once synonymous with power, now drew disgust. Investors fled, and the company collapsed under federal seizure. For the first time, Ethan was truly alone. Maya Lang, now part of a witness protection program, watched from a small motel room hundreds of miles away. The screen showed Ethan's mugshot, hollow-eyed and broken. She took a deep breath and turned off the TV. "It's done," she whispered to herself. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." But the damage had already rippled far beyond him. Caldwell Holdings was dismantled piece by piece, board members resigning, stockholders suing, employees scrambling to save their futures. The empire Ethan built on lies became a cautionary tale in every business paper across the country. Meanwhile, Grace received a letter, not from Ethan, but from one of his former assistants. Inside were copies of confidential documents proving Ethan had hidden millions offshore. The assistant's note read, "He planned to flee before sentencing. I thought you should know what kind of man he really was." Grace stared at the papers, anger and pity colliding inside her. He wasn't trying to save himself, she said quietly. He was trying to run from the truth. Logan looked at her, admiration flickering in his eyes. And you didn't. You faced it? Grace smiled faintly. Because I had to, for Noah. Later that week, Grace visited her parents' old house in the countryside. The fields were quiet, wind rustling through the trees. She buried the papers in the dirt beside a small wooden cross her father had built years ago. "You taught me right from wrong," she said softly. "He taught me what happens when someone forgets the difference." In prison, Ethan sat alone in the cafeteria, staring at his untouched meal. Around him, the noise of other inmates filled the air. Laughter, fights, curses, but he heard nothing. He pulled a small photograph from his pocket, crumpled and worn. It was from his wedding day. Grace was smiling him then, her eyes bright with love and faith. He tore it in half. The guards called for lights out. Ethan lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed that moment in the hospital lobby, her voice screaming for help, his own message on the screen. "Busy. Don't make a scene." For the first time, guilt crept in, not loud but steady, like a whisper that wouldn't stop. Across town, Grace tucked Noah into bed, humming softly. Outside her window, the city glowed, alive, forgiving, full of second chances. Logan lingered at the doorway. "You okay?" She smiled. "Better than okay. Free." He nodded, his voice low. "Then maybe it's time to start living again." Grace looked out at the stars. Maybe it is. And somewhere in a dark cell, Ethan Caldwell finally understood that the worst prison wasn't made of steel, but of memories that never let you sleep. Spring arrived in Seattle like a slow exhale. The rain softened, cherry blossoms filled the parks, and the city seemed to wash itself clean of winter's pain. For Grace Porter, it felt like a new beginning, one she had never thought possible. 6 months had passed since Ethan's conviction. The scandal had faded from the headlines, replaced by fresher tragedies and scandals. But for Grace, it wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about rebuilding, not her reputation, but her purpose. She stood before a group of investors and philanthropists inside a renovated community center downtown. A banner behind her read, "Aurora Foundation, because every mother deserves care." Grace held the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. 6 months ago, she began, "I nearly died because a man decided that my life wasn't worth the cost of an insurance policy. But I'm standing here today because someone believed differently. Because someone acted." Logan Pierce, seated in the front row, smiled quietly. He had insisted that the foundation carry her vision, not his name. "You saved yourself," he'd told her. "I just opened a few doors." Grace continued, her voice steady now. "No woman, no mother, should ever have to beg for the right to survive. Aurora Foundation will provide medical coverage, counseling, and legal aid for women who've been denied care. We'll make sure no one else goes through what I did." Applause filled the room, genuine and thunderous. For the first time in a long time, Grace didn't shrink from the sound. She stood taller, her smile soft but real. After the event, she walked outside with Logan. The air smelled of rain and fresh earth. "You were incredible," he said. She laughed softly. "I was terrified." "That's how you know it mattered," he replied. They stopped under the blooming cherry trees, petals drifting around them like snow. Grace turned to him. "Why did you help me, Logan?" "Really?" He hesitated. "Because years ago, when my mother died from a denied insurance claim, I promised myself I'd never let that happen to anyone else. But when I saw you on that hospital floor, it wasn't just a memory. It was fate giving me a second chance to keep that promise." Grace's eyes shimmered with tears. "You kept it?" He smiled. "You're the one keeping it alive." At home that evening, Grace sat on the couch, watching Noah crawl across the rug, babbling at a stuffed bear. The apartment glowed with the golden light of sunset. For once, she wasn't waiting for a phone call, an apology, or an explanation. Her world was finally quiet and full. On the TV, a news report mentioned the foundation's launch. Then, almost as an afterthought, the anchor added, "Former executive Ethan Caldwell was denied parole today after authorities discovered hidden offshore accounts. Additional charges are pending." Grace muted the sound. She didn't need to hear the rest. Justice had already done its work. Later that night, she found a letter slipped under her door. No return address. She unfolded it carefully. "Grace, you don't know me, but I was a nurse at the hospital that night. I wanted to say thank you for speaking up. Because of you, we changed our policies. No one gets turned away anymore. You saved more lives than you realize." A friend, Grace, pressed the letter to her chest, tears falling silently. When Logan called to check in, she said simply, "We did it." He chuckled softly. "You did it?" "No," she whispered, glancing at her sleeping son. "We all did." And outside her window, beneath the soft glow of the city lights, the sign of the Aurora Foundation flickered to life, a beacon for every mother who had ever been told she wasn't worth saving. The television studio lights were blinding, hotter than Grace Porter had imagined. She sat perfectly still in the leather chair, the microphone clipped to her blouse. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, but her expression was calm, measured, strong. Across from her sat Diane Lowell, America's most respected talk show host, the kind of woman who could make or break a story with a single look. "Grace," Diane began, her voice soft but precise, "6 months ago your name was at the center of one of the most shocking scandals this country has seen. Today you're being called the woman who changed the system. How does that feel?" Grace took a breath, forcing a smile. "Strange," she admitted, "because when I was lying on that hospital floor, I didn't feel like someone who could change anything. I just felt forgotten." The audience sat in absolute silence. Diane leaned forward. "And yet you survived. You fought back. You built something extraordinary, the Aurora Foundation. What gave you that strength?" Grace hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the camera lens. "Honestly, my son. Every time I looked at him, I realized I couldn't let the world he grew up in be one where people had to earn the right to live. And someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." "You mean Logan Pierce?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Yes, Logan gave me a hand when I was drowning, but he never pulled me out. He just reminded me I could still swim." The host smiled knowingly. "The public loves the two of you. There are rumors." Grace laughed softly. "People will always talk, but what matters is the work. The foundation isn't about us. It's about giving women a voice, a lifeline. That's the real story." The screen behind them flickered to life, showing photos of Aurora clinics opening across the country. Women hugging nurses, children smiling in crowded waiting rooms. The audience clapped. Diane's voice softened. "You turned pain into purpose. But can I ask, do you ever think about him? About Ethan?" Grace's expression shifted, sad but steady. "I do," she said quietly. "I think about how easy it is to lose yourself in power, in fear, in pride. And I think about forgiveness, not for him, but for myself. Because hating him means he still controls part of me. I can't let that happen." The host nodded, visibly moved. "That's incredibly powerful." Grace smiled faintly. "Pain either destroys you or rebuilds you. I chose to rebuild." After the cameras stopped rolling, the audience rose to their feet in applause. Crew members wiped tears from their eyes. As Grace stepped off stage, Logan was waiting in the wings, hands in his pockets, watching her like she was the only person in the room. "You did it again," he said quietly. "You made them feel something real." She smiled, walking toward him. "I wasn't trying to. I was just telling the truth." "That's why it works," he said softly. Outside the studio, the night air was crisp. Flashbulbs popped as reporters shouted her name, but Grace didn't rush. She held her son in her arms, his small hand reaching for her hair, his laughter cutting through the noise. "Mommy, look, stars," he said, pointing upward. Grace followed his gaze. "Yeah, baby, stars." Logan watched them with a quiet smile. "You realize you're one of them now, right? People are looking up to you." Grace shook her head, laughing gently. "Stars fade, hope doesn't." They walked to the car as the city lights shimmered behind them. Grace glanced back at the glowing billboard of her interview replaying above the studio. No woman should have to beg for mercy. She whispered to herself, "Not ever again." And in that moment, under a sky full of real stars, Grace Porter stopped being the woman who survived and became the voice for every woman who still needed saving. It was a Sunday morning in early summer when Grace Porter finally felt like life had found its rhythm again. The city outside her window was alive. Children laughing in the park, church bells echoing in the distance, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the bakery below. For the first time in years, there was peace. No reporters, no courtrooms, no fear, just quiet. Grace sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee while Noah played on the floor with building blocks. The boy had his father's sharp eyes, but none of his darkness. When he laughed, it sounded like sunlight. "Mommy, look," he said, holding up a crooked tower. She smiled. "It's perfect, sweetheart. You're an architect just like Grandpa wanted to be." Noah giggled. "I'm building a castle." Grace leaned down, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Then make sure it's one no one can tear down." The doorbell rang. She glanced at the clock. It was still early. When she opened the door, Logan Pierce stood there, casual for once in jeans and a white shirt, holding a box of pastries. "I brought bribery," he said with a grin. She laughed. "That's the best kind." He stepped inside, his presence filling the small apartment with warmth. He set the box down and handed her a folded envelope. "It's official," he said. "The Aurora Foundation just got federal recognition. You're now eligible for nationwide grants." Grace blinked. It means your work just went national." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, eyes filling with tears she didn't expect. "We did it." Logan shook his head. "You did it. I just made a few phone calls." Grace smiled faintly. "You keep saying that, but I think fate's been making calls longer than either of us." They sat together, watching Noah push his toy car across the table, his laughter echoing through the room. It felt almost unreal, how far she'd come from that night of rain and terror. "Do you ever think about him?" Logan asked gently. Grace didn't need to ask who. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with hate anymore, just understanding. I think he was broken long before I met him. I just didn't see it." Logan nodded slowly. "You still found the courage to forgive." "Not for him," she said quietly. "For me, because carrying anger is like holding fire. You only end up burning yourself." Outside, sunlight streamed through the curtains, landing on Noah's face as he giggled, stacking blocks higher and higher. Grace took a deep breath. "You know, I used to think survival was enough, but now I want more. I want to live, to build something beautiful out of the ruins." Logan smiled. "Then let's build it together." Their eyes met, steady, unhurried, full of the kind of peace that only comes after a storm. A year later, Grace stood at the grand opening of the Aurora Women's Health Center, the Foundation's first fully funded hospital. Cameras flashed, but this time she didn't shy away. Logan stood beside her, holding Noah's hand as she cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause. Her speech was simple. "I was once a woman who thought her story ended in a hospital lobby. But every ending," she said, voice strong, "is just the beginning of someone else's hope. Today we begin again, for every mother, every daughter, every woman who deserves to be seen, heard, and healed." The audience rose to their feet, many in tears. Grace looked out over them, her heart full. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, he whispered, "Mommy, are you happy now?" She smiled, brushing a kiss against his cheek. "More than happy, baby. I'm free." And as the city lights flickered outside, Grace Porter finally closed the last chapter of her pain. Because what began with betrayal had ended in rebirth, and the woman once left to die had become the light that taught others how to live. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here right now, my friend, that means something in this story touched your heart in a way words can't quite explain. Maybe it's Grace's strength. Maybe it's the reminder that no matter how dark life gets, the light can always find its way back in. You see, life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about learning from it. As the Stoics said, what stands in the way becomes the way. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every loss, it all shapes us into who we are meant to be. Grace's journey reminds us that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means forgiving, rising, and choosing peace over anger. You don't need to be perfect to start again. You just need to believe you can. So if you're walking through your own storm right now, hold on. The sun will rise again, just like it did for her. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a like, drop a comment about what part moved you most, and don't forget to subscribe, because together we'll keep telling stories that remind us pain ends, but courage lasts forever.